A short time ago, Kieran Gilbert sat down with the Prime Minister in his office where they discussed the deal that secured his power price relief plan, relations with China and his vision for the nation in 2023.
Prime Minister, thanks for your time.
Good to be with you.
Alan Carpenter established that gas reservation in WA, we heard many warnings from the gas industry. Do you see the complaints from the industry that we're hearing today now in a similar light to what was seen in WA all those years ago?
I'm certainly confident that we've got the balance right. This is a very modest package of a modest intervention that's required because of the extraordinary circumstances. And we did see industry at the time say that that was a wrong decision by the Carpenter government. The truth is that WA is in a stronger position today because of that visionary decision that was made.
He says it's ridiculous that we don't have a national reservation, that no country with our resources allows unfettered access without putting some aside for domestic use. You're open to that now, aren't you?
Well, you can't rewrite wrongs that have occurred in the past. That's one of the issues that we're dealing with here. You have existing contracts that we were determined to not interfere with. You have sovereignty issues that we were determined to not create as well. So we had to fashion a reform based upon not having unintended consequences of damaging our trade relationships, for example. So we've done that. But one of the things that we're looking at in the future, for example, with New South Wales, with additional projects, is making sure that that is for domestic purposes. And I know that that's a position that's shared across different levels of government and, of course, across different political views as well.
Is there a risk, though, that the move that we see today, it might chill investment or supply?
No.
What's your argument against that?
Because the truth is that a $12 price on gas, a ceiling, if you like, is something like 96% of gas contracts, deals that were done in 2021 were for under that. And the average price was under $10. And so the idea that somehow this decision today will inhibit investment. If investment was good prior to 2021 based upon that price, then the higher price that's allowed by this temporary measure that we've put in should do nothing whatsoever to inhibit investment. And I'd say to the sector as well, they want to be careful that they're not talking themselves down because there are big opportunities for future investment. We welcome future investment. We need to deal with issues of supply. But we had 10 years in which the failure to have an energy policy meant that 4 gigawatts left the system and only 1 returned. And that's why...
What do you mean, though, by saying they're talking themselves down?
Well, if you go out there and you say, oh, this will inhibit investment, this will create issues for us going forward, then you're essentially talking down your industry. And I see no reason, there's nothing in this legislation that should require that sort of conversation. We saw it before the industrial relations legislation, Kieran, where some were out there saying it would immediately result in all this chaos and dysfunction. The legislation passed, the world's gone on, it's dealt with things just like the world dealt with the Carpenter government's reforms that were put in place. And frankly, they'll deal with these reforms as well in a constructive way. The
Greens are claiming a win on the electrification of homes, that policy area. Weren't you going to do that anyway?
We, of course, have always been talking about the need to ensure that people can use electrification process and therefore then use renewables to drive down emissions. That's a part of greater efficiency. Of course, there's nothing mandated in this. It's about giving people the opportunity to have greater energy efficiency in their homes, therefore reduce power bills at the same time as they're reducing their emissions. So this is something that we'll look at and work across the Parliament in the lead up to the budget next year. But I must say this, that the minor parties and the crossbenchers were all prepared to be constructive, all engaged, whether it was Adam Bann or Bob Katter or other independent senators and members. The opposition, having failed to put in place a policy for 10 years, today voted for higher power prices. They voted to defend the interests of big corporations making massive profits without any recognition that there is a responsibility to manufacturers, to households to deliver for their interests.
Are the Australian people more open to an intervention like this in the energy market than, say, when the former Labor government tried to deliver that mining tax and copped all the flack? Do you think there's been a shift in sentiment?
Well, they know what's happening in the world. There's been an invasion of Ukraine by Russia that has led to a massive spike in global prices. It's led to a massive increase in global inflation. Now, countries around the world are having to deal with this. In the United Kingdom, the Conservative government there have brought in essentially a super profits tax that they are then using to rebate households and businesses in the energy sector. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And the idea that we could just sit back and do nothing, which is what the opposition wanted us to do, is irresponsible. It would have seen manufacturers and households be hit. And I was somewhat stunned, frankly, that Peter Dutton and the opposition were prepared to vote today for higher power prices for both businesses and for households.
Let's move on. And the shocking events in Queensland this week, one of the perpetrators of that atrocity apparently had a gun licence in New South Wales. It's not clear how much, if any, knowledge the Queensland police had of that. Shouldn't there be immediate access in terms of gun registries, who's got licensed guns and whatever across borders? Would you look at changes in that area if need be?
Well, there's an investigation which is ongoing, of course, Kieran, and today we've had a condolence motion in the Parliament, a very solemn moment in the Parliament, and over coming days, of course, we'll continue to mourn as a nation the two police officers, but also the neighbour here who lost his life. And these tragic events have impacted everyone in that local community. They've impacted everyone in the family that is serving police officers and their families, but also I think across the Australian community. Look, we'll examine any issues which arise out of this tragedy. We'll do so in a coherent and constructive way.
John Howard, one of your predecessors, undertook significant gun reform after a major tragedy. Would you look at further tightening gun restrictions to ensure that our world's best practice continues in this area?
Well, John Howard deserves a great deal of credit, along with Tim Fischer, for the reforms, but also, of course, I was a part of the Labor Party opposition at that time that gave its full support to the reforms. We'll examine, allow the investigation to take place. Any recommendations that come from it, we would certainly be prepared to examine.